Hey everybody, this is Will C, and welcome to one of my first YouTube storytelling videos. I am super excited to get this off the ground, and I hope you enjoy the story that I'm going to tell today. The random word that I was given was sport. I came up with my thought process for this word a while back, and it became one of my favorites, so I thought it would serve as a really great demo for you guys to see what the channel was really about. I hope you enjoy. In a world governed by an evil dictator and his corrupt regime, a pack of 5 warriors chose to fight back. Their strength, speed, precision, endurance, and strategy showed people what they could truly accomplish. They gathered supporters, freed outposts, and after 5 years of struggle, finally overthrew their ruler. However, after they had overthrown the dictator, cracks began to form in the group. Each member had a different idea on how their continent should be run. Slowly, these cracks became bigger, and the 5 split apart into different factions. Now, each of these factions are competing for the right to rule. Every 5 years, the factions send one person to compete for that faction's right to rule their continent. That person would have to outwit and outplay the others in a grand war games style event called the Grand Feat. Only the strongest, most worthy competitor would win their faction the right to rule. And this year was Zir's opportunity to prove himself. The announcer introduced the 5 combatants. Parjin of the Strength faction. Her determination in the face of adversity has made her legendary. But will she overcome these obstacles? Zir of the Speed faction. His quick wits and sharp reflexes make him an incredible force to be reckoned with. But can he snatch a victory? Q of the Precision faction. The Precision faction won the previous Grand Feat, but can she pinpoint the victory once again? Rare of the Endurance faction. Despite Rare's gentle nature, he can withstand the most forceful attack. However, can he outlast our competitors? And finally, Laffy of the Strategy faction. Laffy's skills as a tactician make him an incredible opponent, but he will need more than brains for this competition. Will he come up with a winning plan? Let's find out. Who will defend their land and who will be marked? Warriors, let the Grand Feat commence! Immediately, Parjin and Ku face off. Parjin knows that Ku is her biggest competition, and she doesn't want the Precision faction to win 2 Grand Feats in a row. So, she full force attacks Ku. While this is going on, however, Rare approaches Zir about forming an alliance. Zir, wanting to finish up the competition as quick as possible, agrees. And while Ku is losing the battle, Zir sees this as an opportunity for his new alliance. Zir and Rare approach Ku about joining their alliance. Ku agrees with the stipulation that they help her defeat Parjin. Parjin is very close to defeating Ku outright, but if they can launch a sneak attack while Parjin is distracted, they have a chance of defeating Parjin. So, Rare, being from the Endurance faction, helps Ku withstand the last of Parjin's attacks, while Zir, being from the Speed faction, sneaks around trying to get a good angle to attack Parjin. Right as Parjin comes out of her castle to deliver the final blow to Ku's defenses, Zir sneaks out and tags Parjin, thus outing her from the game. This leads to Ku joining their alliance, and now Zir, Rare, and Ku are in a pretty good position together. Now that the 3 of them have a chance to strategize, they pool their resources. Rare has incredible defenses, but Ku's artillery greatly augments their power. Ku's artillery are large enough and versatile enough to launch any projectile across the entire battlefield, which may help them defeat Laffy. However, before they can come up with a game plan, Laffy launches a massive attack on Ku to try and finish her off. While the battle has been raging on, Laffy has been lying low, stockpiling resources, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment is now. The three of them rush into action. Rare helps Q defend her borders once again, while Zir sneaks around Luffy's troops and infiltrates Luffy's castle. However, Luffy, being the skilled tactician that he is, lays traps in his castle for Zir. He anticipated Zir's movements, and unfortunately, Zir lacked the foresight to avoid these traps. As Luffy goes to tag Zir, getting him out of the game, a blast from Q's artillery shakes the castle. Luffy is momentarily shaken, and Zir uses this opportunity to break free from Luffy's trap and tag him. Luffy is now out of the game, and it's just the three of them. But wait, as soon as Luffy leaves the game, Rayard betrays the team and vanquishes Q. He was biding his time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He was outlasting their alliance, and he saw his opportunity and he took it. It's all down to Zir and Rare. Rare is in a much better strategic position. His troops occupy both Parjin and Q's resources, making him a strong defensive threat. The longer the game continues, the more powerful Rare will become. Zir must take him out as quickly as possible. However, from his encounter with Luffy, Zir knows that rushing into things isn't always best, and to defeat Rare, he will need a plan. Rare will most likely retreat to his castle, where he can set up an incredible line of defense. Zir will need to somehow bait out Rare's troops and get him to deploy them prematurely if Zir is to stand a chance. But how will Zir make it past his troops to Rare in the first place? How is he going to mislead them? Where is he going to go? But that's when it hits him. Zir makes a run for Q's castle, luring Rare's troops after him. As he narrowly escapes, Zir heads straight for Q's artillery. Once he gets there though, he's cornered. Rare's troops have him surrounded. There is nowhere for him to run. But there is somewhere for him to go. Zir quickly loads himself into Q's artillery and fires. Zir flies past Rare's troops, over his defenses, and straight at Rare. Rare, with no time to react, gets tagged by Zir. Zir, tumbling to the ground, is victorious. He has won the grand feat. As Zir returns from the battlefield, the spectators rise with thunderous applause. His former competitors congratulate him on a job well done, because Zir has done it. Zir learned from his mistakes, he adapted, and he has brought his faction the victory. He will go down in history as one of the winners of the grand feat. Thank you guys so much for watching. I had a lot of fun writing that story, even though I was a little nervous at first when I got sport as my word. I'm not super knowledgeable about sports, but I was really inspired by like sports movies and even some superhero movies where there's some sort of competition and then there's underdogs who might or may not win, but you believe in them and you root for them, and through determination they make a difference. So I thought that was a really fun thing to explore, and I'm really glad that I got to write it. When I first got sport, my first instinct was to list all of the different aspects of athleticism, or like what goes into a sport. So that kind of manifested itself in these different factions. I couldn't really choose which one that I really wanted to focus on, so I decided to take like the kind of route that Divergent did, where you had these different aspects of humanity and they're all different and completely separate, but it's interesting how they'll intersect and how people from different factions will interact with each other. So I kind of drew from that in my story, which you can see with the 5 factions. However, to justify having 5 factions, I needed to relate this somehow in the story itself. So as you might remember, the story opened up with this little microcosm of what the actual story would unfold to be, of these 5 warriors overthrowing their dictator and then splitting up into the 5 factions. This let me then go on and create these 5 factions and give you kind of like a sense of what the story would be, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but that relates to the promises and payoffs of the story. Now that I had this really interesting world for the characters to live in, I needed to drive them together with some sort of conflict. Since I was given the word sport at the beginning, the natural conclusion is to make up a sport for them to compete in. so I used my pre-existing lore to define this competition where they would have to participate, thus the Grand Feat. Initially, the Grand Feat was going to be super complicated with a bunch of rules and tricks and exploits, and it would be really interesting to see how the characters could take the rules, work within them to figure out really clever solutions to get out of these really dire situations. However, the length of my story didn't really allow for that. If I had 1,000 pages, for instance, it would be fine to spend like 50 or 100 of them explaining the rules of the game, because you still get 900 pages of character interaction, plot, story, romance, relationship, etc. But since this video was only about 5 minutes, I didn't want to waste 3 minutes just describing the rules of the game, and then you only get 2 minutes to really interact with the characters. One of my biggest inspirations is Pixar. Pixar has 22 rules of storytelling that they abide by in all of their films, and their 5th rule is simplify, focus, hop over obstacles, combine characters. It'll feel like you're losing information, but you're actually being set free. So I really took this to heart in this scenario and really just simplified it down to what does this athletic competition need to do. All this competition needs to do is provide a context for these characters to interact. The precise rules of it didn't need to be super specified, so it ended up becoming sort of like a combination between Risk and Tag, which actually worked out really well. You got to spend a lot more time with the characters, there was some really tense moments, and you got to see them interact in this really interesting competitive nature without having to worry about, oh wait, is he doing this, does this break the rules sort of thing. You got to actually focus on the plot of the story. After making these 5 characters, I really could have chosen any one of them to be my protagonist. For example, I didn't do a whole lot with Parjin. She gets outed from the game pretty early, but you could have taken her as your protagonist and done some really interesting things with her. Her story could have been about defying the odds and overcoming obstacles and having the heart of a champion, and that would be a really cool, really interesting story. Or if you relate more with Luffy, you could write a really interesting Brains Over Brawn type of story. It's really up to you what you want to write about, and I just chose Zir because at the time I was writing the story, I wanted this fun, fast-paced, almost whimsical plot with like a quippy, fun character. But it's up to you as a writer to use your tools to tell the stories that you want to tell, and that's really the fun part about it. That's why I'm making this channel. It's not to say that my stories are better than anyone else's, that's not why I'm doing this. It's just to like use what I've learned to tell the stories I feel like telling, and it's just a lot of fun to do that, and I hope that you can take what I've shown you in these videos or what others show you in like classes or lectures or anything just out in life, and you can go and use that to tell the stories that you want to tell, and I think that's just a really fun thing to do, and it makes the world a better place. Speaking of characters, I wanted to give Zir a character arc that reflected his growth. When a protagonist is always right, doesn't face hardship, and doesn't change as a result of the narrative, the story can feel pointless, although there are exceptions. Why even send the protagonist on this journey if they're not going to learn something about themselves or someone close to them or the world in general? This can make this protagonist feel one-dimensional and flat and just boring. So I decided to use Zir's defining trait, his speed, against him. By rushing into an alliance with Rare, he didn't consider the consequences of his actions. He didn't stop to think what would happen when the chips were down and all of the other competitors were out, except for those inside of his alliance. This also fit really well with Rare's character of enduring through the pain and the hardship, because he was able to lie in wait and endure the alliance while it best suited him. Rare isn't a bad guy, he's just more calculating than Zir initially gave him credit for. The only way that Zir was able to defeat him was by using what he had learned. He had to learn not to rush into things as a result of his alliance and as a result of his encounter with Luffy. He won because he slowed down and came up with a plan. As I said before, this story relies on promises and payoffs, as do most stories. Early details in the beginning of the story give the audience insight into future events and character motivations. For example, in my story, I introduced it to you as a society built where a small pack of fighters overthrew a large evil dictatorship. This tells the audience to expect action and possibly an underdog story. So, when I introduce the grand feat, it is a natural introduction because it provides a context for action to occur. And I introduce Zir as a character wanting to prove himself, thus lending him the association of an underdog. As the story continues, Zir is continually put into situations in which he must act, even though he does not have the upper hand. This lends into his association with the underdog that was promised early on. He's in these scenarios where action must occur, he must do something, so there's incredible tension whether will he do it or not. So at the very end, when Zir succeeds, where he overcomes every obstacle laid before him, it feels very satisfying. The investment of the audience paid off because the promises made earlier on were kept. Promises set the tone of the story, and by setting up these elements early, this leads to character motivations and character actions being better understood, events being more impactful, and audiences being generally more satisfied with your story. Thank you guys so much. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see me do this sort of storytelling live, please check out my Twitch stream. I'm also raising money through Twitch for Feeding America and their COVID-19 response. Feeding America is providing food to kids who rely on school breakfast and lunches for meals, but can't anymore now that schools have moved online. If you have an extra $1 or $2, please consider donating it at the link down in the description. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see where the next story takes us. Thanks, guys.